Welcome. Thank you for coming to tonight's fourth Community Scholars event and very first Community Scholars Dialogue. We have had 3 Community Scholars lectures in the past, but when we discovered that we had 3 community scholars who were passionate about hip-hop education, we invited them to have a dialogue. So this is an inaugural event. The Columbia University Community Scholars Program was established in 2013 to offer Columbia area residents scholarships and access to all university resources and to pursue their academic and professional aspirations. Tonight, we're really excited to present 3 community scholars, Martha Diaz, Regan Sommer McCoy, and Peter Noel, discussing hip-hop education, propelling and preserving the movement.
Thank you, George, and the Community Scholars Program for inviting me. This is such a privilege to be part of the community and be part of Columbia University because we get to say and narrate our stories. We get to say what's going on in our community, and we work together with scholars. I snuck into academia too, and you know what? I stayed there. And I knocked down the door and I started my own center, and I don't have a PhD. So, you know, anyone can do this. Thank you. So before I get started, this is going to be really brief. This is not an exhaustive timeline. This is something I put together just so that we can move the conversation from should've, could've, would've to they're doing some amazing work, okay? And so, you know, hip hop was shaped by the civil rights movement. So all of the teenagers that created hip hop were being born during 1950s, right, and 1960s. And they were being influenced by the Black Arts Movement, the Black Panther Party, the Young Lords Movement, and Black Studies was being formed. And these were university students, college students that demanded that our history be taught in schools. And this was happening while Little Bambaataa and Kool Herc were coming from the islands, and their family were settling in the Bronx, and they were part of the post-industrial movement of labor, where we were no longer in factories and there were no jobs, and the city was going bankrupt, and arts programs were taken out, and so they had to do with what they had accessible to them, and they created hip hop. So they are geniuses. We can trace hip hop actually before this event, but we celebrate hip hop culture on August 11th, 1973, which is when Kool Herc and Cindy Campbell had that infamous party that everyone talks about in Sedgwick and Cedar in the Bronx. During that same time, Africa Bambaataa, who was on the other side of town, was visiting South Africa and came back with this idea that he was going to start the Universal Zulu Nation. And he was a former gang member, so he wanted to bring the youth together to redirect that energy. Put your bats down, knives down, guns down, let's build. And that's what he did with Zulu. And of course, Zulu Nation. But of course, he was inspired by Kool Herc, so was Grandmaster Flash, so were so many DJs. During this time, there was a teacher in the Bronx, Rita Fetcher, who was filming students and gang members in the community. And, you know, in 16 millimeter style, she was capturing what was going on. And what she discovered was that these gang members weren't as bad as we all thought, as the news portrayed us. They were actually organizing. And of course, we all know that there was a peace treaty that happened. And this peace treaty led to the explosion of hip hop. For the first time, and if you see this movie, Flying Cut Sleeves, or Rubble Kings, which Shan Nicholson directed. If you see those movies, you will see them as teenagers coming together, forming these parties and saying, hey, for the first time, I could go check out a girl in the other block. I can have a conversation. And so this created community. Of course, 1979, what was released in 1979? Rapper's Delight, the Sugar Hill Gang was the one that put that out. That's when hip hop went commercial. Of course, in 1983, HipHop Cinema started, which is my specialty. A documentary and a narrative were both released in 1983. Wild Style, directed by Charlie Ahern, and Style Wars. These two movies came out simultaneously. One premiered at Sundance, and then later screened at PBS. And the other one premiered on 42nd Street, in one of those theaters on 42nd Street. So it was amazing. For the first time, people are making movies about this culture. Now, this is 1983. That's 10 years after the culture was beginning to develop. Martha Cooper and Henry Chalfant released the first graffiti book in 1984. They had been documenting what was going on in the subways, and they weren't from the community, but they saw art. They heard the voices. They recognized the youth who were saying, we are here too. We are also here. And so in 1987, another dual event happened. Dr. Thandi, at the time she was a student, writes the first graduate thesis examining rap music as a tool for learning. And Davy D, how many of you know who Davy D is? Yeah. Okay, we got some people who know Davy D, who's a journalist, and I didn't even know he was an MC before this. Okay, he was an MC. As an undergraduate student, he wrote the first thesis on the power of rap. And you know what? There were no books written back then. So what did he do? He just went to the pioneers and cited them firsthand. That's the primary source. And so his thesis is all cited by the pioneers. During this time, 1988, two Jewish boys up in Harvard create The Source. And it was just a newsletter at the time, and now it's like, you know, what it is. But during that same time, Yo and Rap Pages and all these zines were developing. We were already documenting. We were documenting. In the beginning, others were documenting, but now we start to see the power in hip hop, and now we go into the magazine publications. Howard University, thank you, 1990. April Silver, Kevin Powell, Raz Baraka, the mayor of Newark, Matt Middleton, and others produced the first hip-hop conference in 1990. And of course, that sets off a whole bunch of other conferences around the country and the world. But in 1994, Trisha Rose comes in and she's like, boom! Here's the first hip-hop academic book. It's filled with first-hand accounts because she was in the Bronx, but also it documents hip-hop and it connects it to Black culture for the first time. There are other magazines and other articles and books that were written, but she really, this is the Bible. This is the first hip-hop academic book. At the same time, Nelson George was teaching at NYU. So journalists have always been the ones documenting alongside the scholars. So in 1996, he releases HipHop America. And it's mostly about, you know, how much money we're making, we're in the top 10, you know, Billboard, and, you know, and he sees the connection with Black music, you know, jazz and blues and rock. And in 1999, the Schomburg is the first institution to say, we're gonna collect hip hop culture. 1999, almost two decades later. So that happens, and in 2000, Kevin Powell curates the first hip hop exhibit. In the new millennium, like right on the brink of the new millennium, 2000, HipHop Nation, Roots, Rhymes, and Rage. Why does it take so damn long? Well, we don't control anything, right? These are other institutions calling the shots. So, in 2001, the first book where the hip-hop pioneers actually tell their story. And Jim Fricke and Charlie Ahern get together, and it's a book called Yes, Yes, Y'all, and it's an oral history, pretty much. And it's beautiful because it's a first-hand account from our pioneers. And they're still alive, most of them, so you can actually talk to them in person. May 16, 2001, big milestone for hip-hop. The United Nations recognizes hip-hop culture as a culture of peace. We have a charter in the United Nations. Over 300 individuals, activists, organizations signed this charter. I was there. 2002, Harvard, the first university to create a hip-hop archive. 2002, I, together with, I don't know how many, like 30, maybe 60 people, filmmakers, educators, professionals got together and we said, we're gonna create our own hip-hop film festival. Yeah, Sundance is cool, Tribeca is cool, but we need our own. And we formed the Hip Hop International Film Festival, the largest of its kind. The next year, we also did the same thing. We started the first Hip Hop Education Summit because we recognize that we have the power, that we don't have to go the same path like we did with the entertainment industry where they own everything. No, we said, no, we're gonna create the standards. We're gonna formalize the fields. We're going to say what best practices is all about. And we started that in 2003. During the same time, other things were happening across the country. But this organization in particular, Words, Beats, and Life, is important because they started at the University of Maryland in College Park, and they broke off into a real organization in 2002. They started in 2000 at the university, and then in 2002, they formalized. They're like a sister organization. They also do teaching, professional development. They organize the community. They publish research and articles. So they're one of many organizations that begin to pop up around the country around this time. 2004, Marc Anthony Neal and Murray Foreman released That's the Joint. 25 years of scholarship and articles are in this thick, it's like 500 pages, but they've covered it all. They're like, okay, the first 25 years of hip hop. A wonderful book if you're studying, if you're into hip hop studies. 2005, Jeff Chang officially creates a hip hop textbook. That's what everybody uses now. This is the first book that receives, a hip hop book that receives an American Book Award. Jeff Chang, go ahead. He's a journalist, a longtime journalist from the Bay. Born in the Bronx, Joe Konso put this together with Johan Kuchenberg, and this is all hip hop's baby pictures in one book. Again, now we are the ones that are telling our story. We're publishing our own books, making our own movies. In 2006, the Smithsonian, the government museum, says we're gonna collect hip hop. They still have not recognized hip hop as a national treasure, but yet they're gonna start collecting. Okay, so that has stopped actually because there hasn't been any movement, and then the African American History Museum, said, well, we'll do it. And so I wonder what is happening with the artifacts that were given by people? Did it go to the African American History Museum? Is it tucked away? Questions. So 2007, Cornell University launches their collection, the hip hop collection. Johan Kuchenberg gives Cornell a collection. He comes from the entertainment industry. He's like, I don't want to throw this away. Do something with it. So they're like, yeah, we'll do something. And actually they created a line item with money to purchase other collections and develop a whole initiative. And actually one of the most exciting Archives is the Cornell Hip Hop Archive. They are the largest. They acquired Africa Bambaata's collection. He donated 40,000 records. They did an amazing community cataloging system where they rented out a gallery, put out all the books, and the people were taking out the duplicates. There was a DJ playing some of the music, and over 3 days, they organized that collection. He had, I think, 10 storage units around the city. And he had a 3-year residency where he taught at Cornell, and now they're processing some of his collections, his items, which are precious notebooks from when he was a little kid. In 2008, after going back to school, because I was like, I'm not making money, there's this film festival, there's this education summit, we're doing wonderful work, but why is it that I can't sustain myself? I'm a single mother of 2. Ice-T comes to my events. Why can't I sustain myself? So I go back to school and I get a master's in what I call hip-hop social entrepreneurship. So I write the first thesis on hip-hop social entrepreneurs. Yes, you have the Russell Simmons model. Yes, we could assimilate, we can create our own same style label, or we could be like Master P and do it out of the trunk, or we can create a business with the intention of building community. And so that's what I discovered, that there were many hip-hop artists and activists doing this. So you can check out my thesis. I don't even know where it is, but I should disseminate it somewhere, but it's called Renegades, Hip-Hop Social Entrepreneurs. And so I created the HipHop Education Center because we didn't have the evidence, we didn't measure our work. And so I thought that was the most important thing to do. Funders want this. This is the only way we can prove and speak the same language to funders and people who want to support us. So I created the HipHop Education Center, and I didn't even add that, but I also had I released the first scan on hip-hop programs in 2011 with Dr. Pedro Noguera. How many of you know who this guy is? Okay, so he's a crusader. He's a reformist. He ain't playing around. He's a sociologist who's saying, listen, schools need to service students, not only in the classroom, but all of the needs. If they're hungry, you need to feed them. If they're sick, you need to check them out and heal them. And that's what he did, and I loved his work. And I said, how can you be teaching and talking about urban education and not include hip-hop? So he said, okay, do some research, and I did. So in 2011, the Museum of Contemporary Art in LA does the first major exhibition on graffiti and street art. They broke all records. The most attended exhibition, the most funded exhibition. They sold out all the books. It went on and on. This is a very important exhibition because it just shows you that we are just as popular as Picasso and Dali. And so this was very important. And Jeffrey Deitch, if any of you know about art collectors or art collections and stuff like that, he represented Basquiat back in the day. So, and of course, Basquiat is the king. He sold the most. I think his last painting went for $126 million. And he's hip hop. So this last slide, I couldn't even give you a timeline because everything just started to take off in the new year, in the new millennium. And all of these organizations and curriculums and scholarships it's beautiful what's happening with hip-hop education and preservation. Of course, there are 2 museums being developed right now, the Universal Hip Hop Museum in the Bronx, the Hip Hop Hall of Fame in Harlem. You got the first university 4-year undergraduate program, fully paid scholarship, just so you could study hip hop and spoken word. You got Scratch Academy. You can learn DJs in about 24 cities around the country, and actually they're international. Science Genius is the first program to have a hip hop science competition. that the city supports. It's a citywide event. You got hip-hop therapy. You have hip-hop hacks in the house. You have the hip-hop dance conservatory. You got the high school for recording arts in St. Paul, Minnesota. They've been around for 20 years. 20 years. 100% graduation rate, 100% college admission. They're about to open a new school in LA, and I'm about to help them do the first online hip-hop school. So I can go on and on, but the last thing is the next level, which is our international exchange program with the State Department. And that's really important because we're not keeping all of this to ourselves. We're sharing it with the community around the world. And what's happening around the world is very exciting. Of course, Brazil is the leader when it comes to including hip hop in the classroom. South Africa had a museum before we even thought of one. Uganda has a museum forming. Berlin has the Martha Cooper Library. So there's a lot of wonderful work happening internationally, and that'll be it for now.
I have prepared my remarks because I'm a little bit winded, long. After writing a book on hip-hop and shelving it in 1985, you tend to go back to it all the time and you don't know what to pull out. So this was a very difficult task for me, but I'm here. For a very long time, the literary tradition had been held up as a model on which to pattern the preservation of African American history and culture. But a new breed of historiographers have combined to focus public attention on what is rapidly becoming a nagging problem: how to stem the drip-drip narrative of hip-hop history for purposes of educating still skeptical outliers, sustaining diehard adherents, and preserving what they have taught and learned from the experience for generations to come. I'm proud to join forces with two intrepid innovators in this field, my community scholars colleagues, Martha Diaz and Sommer McCoy. They specialize in a branch of knowledge that has reimagined the approach to archiving, especially as it relates to the preservation of hip-hop education. With the mainstreaming of rap music and the normalization of hip-hop culture, Martha and Sommer are literally spinning this nuanced form of what I call the hip-hop historical on its head. But the challenge of propelling the hip-hop movement could be a daunting one. Hip-hop artists are the most tight-fisted when it comes to sharing their personal histories. They have closed ranks and hardened their cliques. We, the steadfast documentarians, are continuously, aimlessly chasing them down a rabbit hole. We will tell our stories, they say. They are autobiographies masquerading as hip-hop history, which upon closer examination reads like an aggregate of events in which the crafty and cunning hip-hop artist controls the narrative. But when this cadre of archivists seek you out, they won't be bum-rushing you like TMZ trying to catch you off guard, uncorking your bottled-up anger. Let them in. Just don't expect them to come in like some taint team. It's not their job to clean up your history. If we are to propel and preserve this movement, we must persistently inquire and push as far as human daring and creativity can achieve. Rapping, the whole world knows, and I'm doing this for some people. I know most of you know what rapping is all about and what the hip-hop movement is all about, but here's a refresher course. The rapping the whole world knows by now is deeply rooted in an ancient and honorable African tradition of storytelling. Popular rap lore associates certain folk motifs such as hero worship, street boasting, ego pranking, justing, and artistic lying with the way African elders reminisced about their history and culture and how they passed down their wisdom to the young. What is important about the way the African elder educates the young is that this interpretation of the history of a particular clan is riddled with imagination and inventiveness. What is also important is that this history was not written or recorded. When Roots author Alex Haley wanted to hear the story of the Kente clan, he journeyed to the village of Jufura in the backcountry of the Gambia, West Africa, in search of an African elder who knew the history of this clan. What he learned from his African consultants and guides before he departed to the village brought tears to his eyes. And I quote, "They told me how history had been kept for centuries in Africa. They told me about the existence of very old men who are called griots. As they described, the griots seemed to be like walking, living archives. They told me of men who are in a line of griots. The senior griot would be about the late 60s, early 70s. Beneath him would be men at about decades younger, down to a teenage boy. And the boy would grow up to mature, hearing the story of a large family clan and told over and over again until he began to tell parts of it and a little more until the boy one day, hopefully, would be the senior griot, able to talk for some time. In some big family cases, as much as 2 days without once repeating himself, telling in the most meticulous detail, in great, great microscopic detail, the story of a clan over a period of a century or more. And when I heard such a thing, I was just stared, and they explained to me why I was so stared. They said that I had come from this culture where we live, where, as they put it, we have become so conditioned by the crutch of print that we have almost forgotten what the human memory is capable of. We must embrace today's living archives, because there was a time when the idea of associating them was repulsive to some. Associating with them was repulsive to some. Opponents of hip-hop did everything within their power to discredit and whip up public sentiment against the fledgling cultural movement. Dave Revels, a writer for the Brooklyn-based Big Red newspaper, was apoplectic with rage after the May 1981 shooting of a black teenager at a rappers convention in Harlem. The convention was held at the 369th Armory, and after the shooting, a group of tenants who lived near the Armory decided to form a coalition to denounce hip-hop as a violent subculture. According to Revels, the tenants, and I quote now, had their taste of rapping and they don't want to see or hear of it again. These parents have decided not to blame the kids, but to question themselves. What are they doing as parents to allow such a subculture to exist? Revels all but called on society to untie the tongues of these linguistic dotards. Quote, at a time when even educators are admitting to their inability to teach our youngsters, they are graduating as functional illiterates because they can't read, rhyming rap records continue to perpetuate and give credence to ignorance. Now that's Revels talking, not me. If you doubt this, according to Revel, buy a rap record, or better yet, borrow one from your kids and listen closely. Though very rhythmical and cute, there is nothing in the words to stimulate a child's mind above the level of jive. That's Revels. In his rush to exploit the mayhem over the tragedy, the writer either was unaware or chose to ignore rapping's emerging positive contribution to inner city education. Around the time of the publication of Revel's article, a group called Brothers Unique had been hawking a mixtape entitled School Days, which urged young Americans not to drop out of school. I'm moving on here kind of quickly. Jocko Henderson, a pioneering black DJ of the 1950s, perhaps was the first to develop a rhyming system of education, which employed rapping to teach history and social sciences students in the classroom. Learning the meaning of the Declaration of American Independence, the purpose of the American Revolution, and what taxation without representation was all about, took on added impetus from students participating in Jocko's rap, clap, and learn approach. Jocko's motivational aids were widely deployed throughout the Philadelphia educational system, and a pilot program similar to Jocko's was introduced at Lafayette High School in Brooklyn. This is all happening in the 80s. The lessons were recorded on audio cassette tapes and set to contemporary rhythms in order to stimulate participation. Critics, however, decried its usefulness, asserting that rap music was a fad of the black ghetto destined for the garbage heap of history. While I quote here, while many people were heralding this counter-polyrhythmic poetic litany as an art form, the new wave in black music, others saw it as an ugly fad, disgusting N-word music coming from those wretched boxes. Rap was, to all intents and purposes, aggravated oral assault, a highly offensive type of vandalism. Haters intensified what one writer called a racist discourse in which black Americans figured as barely civilized exiles from the jungle, with, so the cliches ran, tom-toms beating in their bloods and dark laughter in their souls. As part of propelling the movement and preserving hip-hop education, one must wade fearlessly into its myriad controversies. For example, if not DJ Kool Herc, who had conceived this craze? Just who started verbalizing hyperrhythmic yak from Juba to Jive has been one of the longest disagreements among rappers, mountebanks, and triflers in New York City. And even if we limit it to a narrow debate over which inner city is its true home, the blurred lines become even murkier. At the outset of this mission to historicize, We must apply Langston Hughes' methodology of validating poets, whom, he theorized, usually have their fingers on the emotional pulse of their people, of their homelands. Are rappers modern-day poets? Could this emotional pulse be the equivalent to what Sugar Hill's Wonder Mike calls the rhythm of the boogie, the beat? And is this shout out that hello to the black, to the white, the red and the brown, the purple and the yellow, the people to whom Hughes was referring? Had DJ Kool Herc truly exploited linguistic echoes of his own homeland of Jamaica? Next, we should extend Hughes' criteria of validity to how much the rappers knew and when they knew it. Because, argued Hughes, traditionally poets are lyric historians. It's not that the guardians of the beat themselves haven't tried to propel the movement. On the eve of August 11, 2007, the date acknowledged by aficionados, but treated with mock dignity by skeptics as the 40th anniversary of the birth of rap music, the rapper and lyric historian KRS-One acquiesced half-heartedly to his participation in an emergency meeting of pioneers of hip-hop culture. At the huddle convened at the home of breakdancing legend Crazy Legs and attended by the godfather himself, DJ Africa Bambaataa, KRS-One conceded that during a volley of passionate lectures aimed at critics, he may have unintentionally weaponized the artistic boast that gave rise to the burlesque lie about the history and development of the genre. Though participants agreed to draw a line between fact and fiction as they know it, the full-throated attacks KRS-One had mounted against the famous of rap's reputed founder DJ Kool Herc raised doubts about anyone of his caliber ever getting straight the true story of rap's origin. I'm finishing. Preserving hip-hop education means boldly acknowledging, as one sociologist put it, the disadvantaged class of our time, whose tastes, preferences, and proclivities reshape not just our culture, but society at large. Preserving hip-hop education must entail a continuous, systematic narrative of hip-hop's past. That said, current or trending events cannot be alienated. Propelling the movement must also include an association with immediate but significant happenings, social justice, actionable ideas, and unselfish acts that will or can shape the course of the future of hip-hop. So we say to the amateur hoarders, collectors, historians, and archivists, you guys, we would love to deep dive into your stash. Why do we want to preserve hip-hop education? It is a question that Langston Hughes answered 5 generations removed from the HipHop Nation. From the days of the bards and the troubadours, he said, the songs of the poets have been not only songs, but often records of the most moving events, the deepest thoughts, and most profound emotional currents of their times.
First, thank you for having me. I've been on this in this program for the last 2 years, developing my project called the Mixtape Museum, and I'm using mixtapes as a means to archiving hip hop. And Peter and Martha are 2 amazing people, mentors to me that have encouraged me to go forward with this research that I actually thought was ridiculous. The Mixtape Museum is an archival initiative that promotes the studies of mixtapes as records of time, place, and historical situation. For many people of a certain age, the Combat Cassette brings back some vivid memories, right? I'm gonna admit that I made mixtapes, so if any of you want to admit with me, right, okay. The release of blank compact cassettes, because at first they were releasing albums on cassettes, and then they eventually started selling blank cassettes. The release of blank compact cassettes coupled with recording devices like the boombox and Sony Walkman drastically changed how we interacted with music. For the first time, there was an affordable and easy method to recording. Tape to tape, so the boombox had 2 tapes, right? From the radio, those were like what some people call them pause tapes, so you'd hit pause and then record when you thought the song was gonna come on, and sometimes it didn't. So this gave birth to the mixtape. It offered an alternative to listening to pre-recorded albums track by track in the order that the labels dictated. It gave musicians an affordable way to create demo tapes And for some, home recordings were treated as final releases. Because of the compact cassette's pocket-sized composition, low cost, and ability to be dubbed means copied, mixtapes traveled around the world, contributing to hip-hop's rise from a local, community-based movement into the global movement we see today. So really what that means is the compact cassette actually was like one of the early documents of record for hip-hop, right? So it captured audio from live park jams, clubs, shows. Early hip-hop acts like the Cold Crush Brothers actually had like a guy named Tape Master, at every show there to record their shows. And of course, there'd be people in the audience like bootlegging, right? They'd have like they'd make copies and sell them to fans. In an interview with MTV in 2007, DJ Flash recalls making a couple $1,000s a month selling his mixtapes. He charged $1 per minute. So tapes were like, this one's 60 minutes. It was like 60 to 120. So if you were Flash, you would make a tape that was 120 minutes, right? So if you do the math, that's $120 a tape. So he was making that a night, over and over again. Later on, DJs like Brucey B and Kid Capri, they carried on the party tapes. So the party tapes were recorded live at actual clubs and parties. And as I said, they were duplicated. But there was a time, and some of you probably remember, the clubs in New York started to close. I was young, so I don't remember why. I'll do that research. But DJs decided, okay, well, if I'm making money selling these tapes, let me go and make the tape in a studio. And the studio might have probably been at home, right? So they started making these tapes at home and also selling them, right? So if you're from New York, you might remember them being sold on 14th Street, Canal Street, 3rd Ave, some other places, right? On a sheet, on a blanket, like, right? So when they started recording these tapes in studio, this of course opens up like the floodgates for everyone to try to be a DJ and start recording. So you started getting more and more tapes produced and peddled on the street. So from the live tapes, tailor-made tapes or tapes that were, let's just say, if I wanted DJ ABC to make a tape, I'd give him a playlist or say, hey, I want this, or I heard this song. So those were called tailor-made tapes. These tapes were tailor-made for the consumer, right? And so this is in like the 80s, but these hip-hop mixtapes, and I'm talking primarily about DJs here in the city in New York, but not that this wasn't happening anywhere else. It's just that in New York it was very prevalent, right? But after that, well into the 90s, mixtapes were very popular. Labels even were using them to promote artists under the table, right? Because technically selling mixtapes is illegal, right? It's not your copyrighted material. So, but the labels were still working that into artist campaign because it just made sense, right? To promote these tapes outside of just vinyl, you're promoting them on tapes that can be carried all over the place. So after I could go on and on all night, but I can't. But after that, you started seeing DJs like making tape, like starting to do remixes. So right, the tape gave you the option to have different genres of music on one medium, right? So you had like DJs like Clue. Well, Clue was more an exclusive DJ. Exclusive meaning, unfortunately, I'm not going to say this. I'm being recorded. Clue was better at exclusive tapes. And what that means is he would literally wait outside of a studio and get songs that were not released anywhere else. Someone like Ron G was actually mixing like R&B songs with hip-hop songs and creating remixes. So that was your remix tapes. And then people like 50 and Diddy started making more like artist tapes. So you'd have tapes with just like G-Unit on it, and there might be a DJ. Is that a mixtape? That's a whole nother conversation. But it's the evolution that mixtapes have taken. And of course now they are MP3s, RIP, the MP3 is officially dead as of recently. Yeah, so for instance, Apple is not allowing you to download anymore, so you'll just be streaming. But there are still DJs that are making mixtapes now. They're just doing it differently. Right, SoundCloud, Spotify. So little research has been devoted to, the intellectual history of DJ-produced recordings and their role in the evolution of hip hop. So I thought it was important to rescue these tapes because a lot of them are in basements, Nike and Timberland shoeboxes, car trunks, basements, people's attics, and they're hitting 30, 40 years old, and they're in danger of deteriorating. So I'm literally on a rescue mission to find these tapes, digitize them, work with people like my partner and fellow scholar Martha Diaz, and people like Peter that are using these tapes as first and primary sources because they hold a lot of information that is nowhere else. And so that's the Mixtape Museum. So I told George I would speak a little about how I spent my time on this fellowship. I'm by no means an academic. I snuck my way into academia. But it's very interesting looking at what I call mixtape scholarship. It's very interdisciplinary because you can look at the mixtape through the lens of technology. So you're talking about like the medium, the magnetic medium and sound studies and how it's built and how it's deteriorating. You can look at it from a memory perspective. Like when people say, the word mixtape, I find that everyone literally has a mixtape memory, whether it's analog or digital. It's just that the analog memories are always a little bit more interesting. But the mixtape did something for us as people. It allowed us to create on our own terms. So I spend my time trying to systematize like archival, awareness in the DJ community because a lot of the DJs don't have their tapes. So a lot of these tapes live in people's collections all over the world. So I've been reaching out to collectors all over the world and trying to find these tapes. And believe it or not, a lot of the tapes from DJs here in Harlem have made it all over the world because they were copied, and someone might have visited during the summer or went to camp and someone made a copy of it. And then you can also tell like when it gets older, right? After you copy it a couple times, you kind of lose the sound, but it adds a little, a little funk to it. So that's the Mixtape Museum. It's here at Columbia. I've been working with the Digital Humanities Lab in the library because I found that using technology really is the only way to digitize these tapes. I learned SQL so that I can build a database. That's a whole nother story. It's been very interesting. But mixtapes were not released like albums. There wasn't a systematic way that they were released. So it's trying to find a way to organize them, see who has them, what generation the copy is that person has, and then also collecting as much metadata as possible. So I have a lot of work ahead of me. But thank you for listening.
How do we get to these people who still have this treasure trove of material because there are many of them out there? What do we say to them? First, the rappers. They say, when we come to them to ask them about the treasure trove, I'm choosing my words very carefully because there are some things I don't want to reveal. When we come to them, they said, look, yes, we're going to tell our stories, but you want to get into our business. But part of their business in telling them, we think they're coming after your Stormy Daniels. We don't want to know about your Stormy Daniels. How much Stormy Daniels you had. We don't want to know that. We want to know exactly what you did when you went to this club and so forth and so forth. The Mercedes ladies. But there's a passion there's a concern among these people that they will never give it up. And this information is so important.
Yeah, and I would say,
How?
Don't worry. Don't worry, because it's happening. It's happening right now. Paradise Gray just released a book on his whole contribution to hip-hop artists from the first generation, where he was the promoter of the Mud Club and a lot of clubs, Latin Quarters, all of these downtown venues that put on hip hop. And that's, again, in the early 80s, the whole Basquiat era where uptown meets downtown and there is a fusion happening. And so he just put out a beautiful book. The Boston, the University of Massachusetts Boston has a few professors and hip hop artists that came together and they started their own archive. It's called the Massachusetts Hip Hop Archive. And actually on May 19th, they're opening up the library, the public Boston Library, which I visited for the first time and it's beautiful. It's the first library of our country and it's just immaculate. I didn't want to leave. I was like, oh, can I just stay in that corner? But they are opening up their space so that people in the community can digitize their media, which is the most at-risk format. You can probably save, notebooks, but VHS or cassette tapes, those are the most at risk. And so there are initiatives popping up all over the world. So I'm saying, don't worry. I know Biz Markie is one of those people that has the most, he's a hoarder and he has,
Yes, yeah.
he has not only his house, but several storage units around the city. There are many, especially the producers. The producers keep their equipment because you can't play the music, otherwise. Right? And if you don't digitize it, you play it. So they keep everything. And I don't know if you saw the Rapture documentary on Netflix. You saw, who was it? Just Blaze, Paterson, New Jersey. His mom kept all of his equipment, right? Yeah. And so, yes, it's a daunting task, but it's gonna happen. And we're 45 years old as a culture, so.
I should add that Martha organized a symposium a couple years ago at the Schomburg, documenting history in your own backyard. And the reason for doing that was to bring in representatives from Cornell's Hip Hop Archive, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, the Smithsonian, some personal, private collectors, Ralph McDaniels and Paradise Gray, to talk about what the needs are for a hip hop archive, right? And she wrote a paper, an amazing paper that can be found on the HipHop Education website.
Actually, I took it down.
Okay.
I took it down because, and I tell you why. Because I have to write a book. True. And a lot of people are using my work, and some of them are citing me, and some of them are not. Because I don't have a PhD, they're like, oh, yeah, they're just taking. And so I decided I'm going to take all of my research, all of my papers, and I'm going to publish my book.
Okay. So the result of that whole symposium was community contribution to archiving is necessary in order to get a fuller documentation of hip hop, right? So if Martha has a T-shirt collection, right?
Yeah. On the side, I make hip hop quilts, but the reason why I did the symposium was because it was necessary to check these institutions and bring them together, and it was a trap. It was like, come to the Schomburg. We want to know what you're doing. And then I invited 25 institutions and 25 pioneers and collectors. And once we all got in the room, it was like, what are you doing with our stuff? How are you appraising this? What makes you the authority? How are you curating it? How are you making it accessible to researchers and students? These are questions that we had, and we found out that they are like, oh, you're not even a priority in our, we have so many other collections. We've been collecting, and we actually would love your help. And and some of the people that were there were able to release some of their material to other institutions, and Smithsonian's African American History Museum got some. Cornell got some, the Schomburg got some material. And that, for me, that was a beautiful thing. Like, people just need connections, right? Like, all of this is like speculation. We're like figuring out what people are doing, and we think that they don't have our best interests. But when we bring them in the same room, we realized that, oh, they actually are trying to help, but they need our help. And it worked out. It was great.
With all due respect to my colleagues at Harvard and Cornell, can you talk a little bit about, I think there are 3 hip-hop museums that are planned for New York City, 2 in the Bronx and 1 in Harlem, just so we know that it's not all going to be in Brazil or Ithaca.
Well, it would be a damn shame if we didn't have a museum, an institution in New York City, right, that collected hip hop. So the Universal Hip Hop Museum is in the Bronx, and that is being led by Rocky Bucano and Cutman LG and a whole bunch of other pioneers. They are putting this together, and that they actually have a space, I think it's like 5 blocks from Yankee Stadium. And it's going to be beautiful. It's going to be not only a museum, it's going to have apartments. And so the city gave them land. And so that's really beautiful. And then the Hip Hop Hall of Fame is happening in Harlem. And I don't know where it's located, but it's, you know, why not? There's a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. We can have a Hip Hop Hall of Fame. And so it's, those are the 2 for now.
Yeah.
But of course, you know, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame has a permanent collection, which has a few hip hop items. The Experimental Museum in Seattle. The University of Houston has the collection that started from the DJ Swiss. What's his name? No, not Screw. DJ Screw. Yeah, and so there's a lot of interesting projects happening around the country.
I just found out 3 days ago that there's a collection at the University of Washington in Seattle that started maybe a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
And I think we'll kick off our Q&A with another community scholar, John Redick.
Congratulations, good to see you. Well, to hear about the music, you know, I'm an OG. I'll just say old gentleman. I don't think I was a gangster. I wasn't cool enough to be a gangster, but the music was everywhere. And I think, like, you go in Times Square now and you go to these places, and it's better public space. But in terms of, I come from the architecture physical side, the sense of like what it was like, that this music was permeating, and the boombox was taking it everywhere, you know, to the tourists, to anybody. And I'm just curious, in the Bronx, there's real interest now in preservation around cultural landmarks. Doesn't have to be a classic architectural building. Like, I really would like to hear about some of the sites in the Bronx that still relate to this history, and what can we do to help support getting some of those buildings landmarked.
Yeah. 1520 Sedgwick Avenue has been recognized as the home of hip-hop. And when they wanted to tear it down and build these new developments, my people got together and they said, over our dead bodies. They literally formed that. I covered these things at the Village Voice, and there were some people who were sneaking in things for them, and police wanted to come and drag out the tenants. But it stood, and now last year when they came and they said, this street, this building, this street will be recognized as Hip Hop Boulevard, and this building will be recognized as the home of hip hop. No one in power could say, hey, you can't do it. These tenants were ready. We were going to put up this mark, regardless of what you say. 1520 Sedgwick Avenue is going to be the home of hip hop, and it remains like that today. Whether or not it started there, that is the dominant story. This is the story that no one, well, people have challenged, but no one can actually, disrupt at this point in time. 1520 Sedgwick Avenue.
But besides that one particular building,
Right.
there's a sense of, like in Harlem, we've lost a lot of like the Lennox Lounge and places. You can't, for African Americans, 125th Street and some of these other places are America's Black Main Street. And you can't really tell our story by pointing to an empty lot or a new apartment building or a theater, whatever that is. And I just feel like we're at the cusp of interest in the landmarks, about cultural sites that don't have to be architectural,
Right.
and thinking about what is the lay of the land if the museum is in the Bronx, and walk around the neighborhood and get a feel for what it was like.
Well,
at times.
we're actually, the Hip Hop Education Center is mapping out some of these landmarks. And so in addition to Hip Hop Boulevard, of course, you know, there's the Beastie Boy has, one of the Beastie, Adam, is it Adam? Yeah.
Survival.
For the park, right? He has a park. Of course, all the murals are landmarks, the clubs. I know that right now they're in Oakland, they're working on a Tupac Shakur street. And so it's happening. It's happening. I mean, Fife Dog has one in Queens.
And John Redick can help you with the landmarks process
That's
as well.
right.
And I can too.
Yes.
Not that we're limiting our questions
go ahead.
to community scholars, but I think we have another community scholar here who has a question as well. Lil.
Hello, my name is Lil Nicholson. I'm a community scholar, but I also write for the Harlem Community News. And back at the end of January, I went to the windows of Hip Hop's Hip Hop Element Awards. It was very interesting to see a Bronx Borough president rhyming from stuff that he wrote down from mixtapes when he was a kid growing up in the Bronx.
That's right.
But one of the things I wanted to ask you is one of the things that they want to put up in the Bronx is to put up a school to use hip hop as a way to educate the young people who are having a hard time learning the materials during using the traditional methods of learning. And so I was wondering, is there any type of movement up front to do that in other parts of the city as well too? I mean, I know we've got competing museums opening up in different
Nothing
boroughs.
is competing. Nothing is competing. I mean, there's the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and there's the Nashville, Tennessee Museum. You know, that's the wrong perspective, right?
Okay.
Like it's the news, right? There's plenty for everybody. You know, and we'll have our own branding. But yes, I talked about the High School for Recording Arts in St. Paul, Minnesota. A few years ago, about 10 years ago, they tried to open one in Brooklyn, but the charter school system in New York is very difficult to get into. Of course, Minnesota is where charter schools started, so that's where the high school started. But you can look at BCAM, which is the Brooklyn Community Arts and Media High School in Brooklyn. There's the Harlem Renaissance, school here in Harlem. There are plenty of other schools that don't say hip hop, but they are hip hop. And so that's the next level. And I think not only are we seeing, my favorite school is Roses from Concrete in the Bay Area in Oakland. They're a middle school and also wonderful, graduation rates and just doing amazing work. So we're going to see middle schools, we're going to see high schools, and we're already seeing university programs like the Jimmy Iovine and Dr. Dre School in USC.
And I just want to add also that there are also a lot of nonprofit organizations, after-school programs, that are around because a lot of the schools don't have arts in them, right? I have an initiative called HipHop Hacks that uses hip hop to teach technology. And it's not in schools, but we're working with like the Queensbridge Public Library, and we'll have something at Google later in the year, something at LIU in Brooklyn, and also in other states. I'm working on that in Atlanta, Oakland, and Philadelphia. So there are a lot of programs that are around to help enrich students in hip hop.
And I'm delighted to say we have another community scholar who has a question. Michelle?
Yes, I'm a designer, and I'm curious what you're doing to preserve the work of designers from the hip hop, and also how you're going to intersect what you're doing with new technology like virtual reality, augmented reality, artificial intelligence. Excuse me. The AIGA is launching a project called Making Histories, and they tend not to have many designers of colors. So you might consider interfacing with them to preserve some of the history of hip hop.
One of the things that I was interested in with the Mixtape Museum was preserving the J cards. So that's the card inside of the mixtape. So if, I'm sure many of us have, jotted down on the inside of a J card. Like Manny might have given me a tape and then I went and drew on it or something or whatever. So, outside of preserving the tape, I'm very interested in getting some of these tapes and looking at the actual design of the tape and the J card and things like that. Also for in terms of technology, it will end up being that the Mixtape Museum will work with, like I mentioned before, digital humanities scholars in preserving some of these mixtapes, right? And also the images, and also working with technology companies to figure out the copyright issue. The one thing that I am facing is I want to make these cassettes, after they're digitized, available to the public so people can listen to them. But they have to clear copyright. So I'm working with a few technology companies to figure out how to do that legally.
But can I just say that this is a complicated space that we're working in, right? There's a lot of people who are documenting, right? There's a lot of people who are cataloging, and even right now I'm a Nasir Jones Fellow at Harvard, and at the Hip Hop Archive and Research Institute, but they don't actually archive. And that's problematic, because when you give something to an institution that says they're gonna archive and they're actually just gonna store your material, that's a problem. So I went back to school again and got another degree in archiving so I could actually preserve the material. And that is necessary. We don't have hip-hop archivists. I'm actually the first one. And of course, there are other people in institutions that archive hip-hop, but they're not from the community. They're not engaged like I am. And so I claim it. I claim it. I am the first. But thank you. But this is still not good, because if I'm the first and it's 2018, we're in trouble. So I'm recruiting from on a high school level. Because right now, you can make $25 just cataloging, just describing the material, creating metadata. And I am trying to create this whole new field of hip-hop preservation that will complement some of these institutions that are trying to preserve, and even the hip-hop museums and everything. They came to me, they don't have a hip-hop archivist. And so it's very troubling. And so how are we gonna preserve architect, design, all kinds of formats that are so new, right? Because artificial intelligence, augmented reality, these are formats that just came about in the last 2 years. Right now, I just learned about learn machines. You could teach a machine to learn. How are we going to archive that if we're not going to school to learn to learn this? And so it's difficult, but we're trying.
Thank you, all three of you. It was very inspiring. My name is Camilla. I'm a PhD student from Sweden. I'm just visiting NYU. And I do my research around gender and music technology. And I haven't heard you said any female name today, artists. Maybe I missed it because I'm Swedish. Or have you talked about, because I think it's very important.
In what sense? Like
when you presented, when you have talked about all the artists, you talk about you're going to do like this mapping of history. It's very important. It's very important to not forget the women in this culture as well.
Absolutely.
Then when you do a presentation, it's good to have a couple of name or projects that...
No, absolutely, and that's one of the things that I actually am a champion of is, highlighting women, and you're right, I didn't really highlight them because I kind of went through 45 years of history in 7 minutes, but it's okay, because I should have said Kool Herc and Cindy Campbell, right?
Which you did.
I did?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so there was,
Well, we don't want to.
And Dr. Hicks.
I mentioned Dr. Hicks, Sandy Hicks Harper.
Yes.
So I did mention a few, and that last slide actually is filled with a lot of women that are producing these new organizations and initiatives. I think because of the limited time, it is what it is. But as far as technology, I would say that women are probably at the forefront of hip hop and technology.
Thank you all for your information. My name is Michelle Bishop. We actually met about your quilts a long time ago. When you talk about preserving and
And by the way,
database,
the Newark Museum just acquired it. Yeah.
congratulations.
My first one, anyway.
When you talk about receiving mixtapes, and I have a few, you mentioned a little bit about the copyright. How are you tracking down some of the DJs and MCs, like the person's stuff that I have that I purchased? I still have a cassette tape player, dual cassette and all of that. I don't even know if he's still alive. So then how do we legally? And then the other thing, I would love to know what database system the information is being archived in, because that's my other hat. And I'm just very interested in database archiving. And also, there's a sister who I'm gonna put you in touch with, who's an archivist of African and African-American history of all levels. And so she has the skill set. She knows the history, but you can still tie it together because she builds databases also, and that's critical. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
So my background is in the music industry. As a manager, and I used to book tours for the Clipse. I don't know if you guys know who the Clipse are. So I know a lot of people in the music industry, a lot of DJs, and I know people that know people that know people. So when I started the project, the Mixtape Museum was actually inspired by a DJ who passed away about 12 years ago named Justo Faison, who started the Mixtape Awards. So this was actually my tribute to him. And his award show was giving awards to some of these hip hop DJs that were considered underground. They were not being recognized by the labels as having contributed to the success of many artists. So I kept in contact with a lot of those DJs. I literally just spoke to Kid Capri 2 days ago because I'm trying to get an award named after Justo Faison at the Global Spin Awards. And DJ Red Alert, and a bunch of other, DJ Hollywood is still alive. Lovebug Starsky just died a couple of months ago. So I am in touch with a lot of the DJs. Martha is in touch with a lot of hip hop artists, just in general. People are still alive, but this is why this is so critical, right? Because we're dying, you know? And one of the things that I, watch Martha do over the years is like, make sure that these archives are going to the source. They're going to the artists and using them as, as sources and collecting oral histories and doing all of these things. And we should talk because I love databases. I love spreadsheets. So.
Oh, take the question.
No.
Take the question. Take the question.
Well, let me talk about the database because currently my most recent project is with the Tupac Shakur estate. And I'm working with Steve McQueen on a documentary, and this is his first documentary. And this is the first project that I'm coming in as a producer, but I'm working on the archives. So I'm working with the estate. Now, 20 years ago, when Tupac died, he had 3 homes, and they collected everything. As soon as he died, they collected everything, including light bulbs. And they just stored them into 3 storage units. I, in 7 months, have cataloged 5,000 items. I probably have about 25 to 30,000 items left. I needed to create a database. so I created a digital asset management system, which is what I had to go to school for. And I teamed up with Iron Mountain, which is a preservation institution that's been doing great work. And together we built a beautiful database that you can research, you can see pictures, you have the metadata. I have a team of 8. They're all around the country, and they're helping me do this. This is critical, because you don't need an institution. You can create your own database, and that's it, right? When it's time for you to give it up, you give it up, and it's all there. People don't have to guess what you want or what it was, what it is. No. And so I think it's a great question. We need to have the digital asset management systems.
I'm a graduate of NYU as well, music tech program, and also an artist and an entrepreneur.
At Steinhardt or Tisch?
At Steinhardt, so the music tech, yes. My question was for Martha. From an artist's perspective, have you ever tried your proposal of social entrepreneurship on an artist?
Well, I am not proposing anything as much as documenting the work. And so I have presented at social entrepreneurship conferences, and this is exciting, right? Because we're like, we can't just keep the information to ourselves. We got to teach people. So I've gone to conferences, and the social entrepreneurs are excited. They're like, oh, we never thought about hip hop, social entrepreneurs. And we do the same thing. And what's really beautiful about the 21st century hip hop is that you have a person like Chance the Rapper, right, who didn't have any type of media, major label, and he was able to give $1 million to the school system in Chicago, right? And those are exemplars that we need to talk about. I'm not concerned about a war in YouTube because, you know, at the end of the day, I'm looking at Chance. I'm looking at Common with his Common Ground Foundation. I'm looking at Pharrell and his work in Virginia. You know, the city of Virginia gave him a community rec center, and he revamped it to what is his organization? Each Other, Love, Another, right? I chopped it up there. But you know, so they're amazing hip hop moguls that are doing social entrepreneurial work. And then there are emerging people within hip hop that are not moguls, that are not artists, that are just activists, that are building organizations or apps. Like there's a group out of Philly, someone who started in the entertainment industry and said, you know what, I'm going to create an online entrepreneurial program, social entrepreneurial program. They got funding from the Knight Foundation, and they were able to take 20 young high school students and put them through a 10-week program so they can develop ideas. And so you have a really wide net of activists and social entrepreneurs that are doing the work. So I'm not proposing anything. I'm just saying this is something we need to investigate. We need to talk more about. And I'm glad you asked. Thank you.
And thank you. On behalf of the School of Professional Studies at Columbia and the Community Scholars Program, thank you so much for a compelling program. I think we need to do part 2.